He is the American legend sold to us on the silver screen, the buckskinned pioneer, born in the wilderness, a conqueror of beasts and battles. But what if the entire saga of Davy Crockett is a carefully constructed fiction? Today, we dismantle the 7 most pervasive falsehoods that elevated a man into a myth, deceptions so deeply woven into our fabric that they've been accepted as fact. Prepare to see the story you were told completely unravel. First, be sure to like and subscribe to Winlink DeepDive to support our investigative community. Lie number 1, that famous ballad, popularized by Disney, which places his birth on a mountaintop in Tennessee? A complete fabrication. Crockett's true beginnings are rooted in a failed breakaway republic. His legendary fights were staged, his iconic coonskin cap was a studio creation, and his final stand at the Alamo involved a cover-up so profound it challenges the official narrative of the Texas Revolution. And the most damaging lie of all? The one that obscures Crockett's most courageous act, his defiant stand against the brutal policies of Andrew Jackson. Steel yourself, because after this, your perception of Disney and American history will be forever changed. David Crockett was born on August 17, 1786, near Limestone, a site that is now a state park in modern-day Tennessee. The volunteer state rightly claims him as a native son, as he served in its state legislature before moving on to the U.S. Congress. Yet the Disney tune insists he was born on a mountaintop in Tennessee. This contains 2 inaccuracies. First, Crockett's early years were spent in a remote river valley, not on a peak. Second, the place of his birth was not yet Tennessee. The region was then part of a movement by its largely Scots-Irish inhabitants to form the independent state of Franklin. In 1784, Franklin missed being formally recognized by the federal government by a single vote. In defiance of North Carolina, its founders declared sovereignty, establishing a short-lived nation, a simplified version of a complex historical episode. North Carolina reasserted its control over the territory in 1789, later ceding it, along with its western lands, to the federal government. This act paved the way for the eventual formation of Tennessee. So, no, Crockett was not born on a mountain, and no, it wasn't in Tennessee. Admittedly, born on the wild frontier of the lost state of Franklin before its reabsorption and the founding of Tennessee doesn't have the same ring to it. We can forgive the songwriters for that one. Disney's first Davy Crockett episode, Indian Fighter, dramatized the 1813 to 1814 Creek War between the Red Stick Creeks and the United States. It portrayed Crockett as a central warrior who battles and defeats the Red Stick chief before negotiating a peace. Similarly, the 1960 film The Alamo, starring John Wayne, has Crockett boast that fighting Native Americans was his only military experience before Texas. Historically, Crockett did promote his Creek War service for political advantage. However, he was not genuinely an Indian fighter in that conflict or any other. His actual skill was as a hunter and scout. His role as a volunteer involved tracking and reconnaissance duties. He himself confessed to his own inadequacy in formal combat. Contemporaries and historians later described him as too amiable for the brutality of battle. While he exaggerated his contributions, he generally stopped short of outright deception. Texas Monthly. Once labeled Crockett America's first great self-mythologizing opportunist. Imagine building a reputation entirely on a legend of your own creation. To be frank, it's a strategy that has worked brilliantly for some. Though typically honest in his dealings, Crockett adored sharing exaggerated stories of his backwoods exploits. Upon entering politics, he leveraged his charisma as a strategic tool. He can arguably be credited with inventing the model of the celebrity politician. Consistently outspent by opponents, he relied on his wit and storytelling prowess, once upstaging a rival by delivering the man's own planned speech before he could. By the time he reached Congress, Crockett's fame was immense. His public persona, an unrefined, buckskinned woodsman, was both celebrated and mocked by the Eastern elite. His cultural ascendancy culminated with The Lion of the West, a wildly popular play that featured a character named Nimrod Wildfire, a wildly exaggerated parody of a frontiersman based on Crockett. Crockett attended a performance in Washington, D.C. around 1831, publicly embracing the caricature while privately lamenting how it overshadowed his true identity. He aspired to refinement, wearing fastidiously tailored suits and minding his manners in the capital's social circles. Visitors who expected a backwoods rustic were often astonished by his sartorial elegance. The Lion of the West solidified Crockett's mythological image. Playbills and almanac covers forever enshrined him as a rugged pioneer clad in buckskins and a fur cap. Early illustrations sometimes showed him in wildcat skin hats, but the raccoon skin design became the enduring icon. Tales of raccoon hunts are central to the Crockett legend, and if you're humming that tune, you're likely curious about other game. Apocryphal stories of his toddler years aside, yes, Crockett did hunt bears, a great many bears. We'll leave it at that. Political enemies derided him as a mere coon hunter, though he joked that he could charm raccoons out of trees. There is, however, zero evidence he ever wore a coonskin cap before the Nimrod Wildfire character popularized it. When he commissioned a formal portrait of himself as a frontiersman, he chose to wear a stylish felt hat with a white brim. No raccoon in sight. Later narratives describing Crockett departing for Texas or at the Alamo consistently mention a coonskin cap. But these accounts all emerged after his death. If taken at face value, they suggest he only adopted his signature headgear near the very end of his life. In Disney's Davy Crockett Goes to Congress, the second episode, Crockett loses his seat and his political future after opposing President Jackson's Indian Removal Act. This act of defiance is consistent with history and his own convictions. Crockett vehemently criticized Congress for refusing to audit funds allocated for Jackson's initiatives. He even proposed shutting down West Point, viewing it as an institution that funneled taxpayer money to a privileged elite. On Indian removal, he expressed genuine empathy for the displaced tribes, warning the policy would lead to their destruction. History, of course, proved him correct. However, this vote was not his ultimate political undoing. Though he lost his seat in 1830, he successfully won it back in 1832. This re-election did not lead to a surge in legislative accomplishments, but it briefly made him a darling of Whig Party leaders, who considered him for their 1836 presidential ticket. His level of commitment is uncertain, but his fiercely independent nature was at odds with Whig Party discipline, or any party structure. Abandoned by the Whigs after another congressional defeat, and relent persecuted by Jacksonian Democrats, Crockett's political career in Tennessee appeared terminally doomed. On a personal level, he had grown estranged from his wife and her family. Texas, then Mexican territory actively encouraging American settlers, offered the promise of a total reinvention. Friends like Sam Houston had already migrated there, and its vast, untamed landscape called to him. By the time of Crockett's departure for Texas in 1836, tensions between Texian colonists and the Mexican central government were simmering and well known. But contrary to the 1960 film The Alamo, Crockett did not journey there seeking a war. Arriving in January, many Texians believed major hostilities had concluded or were a distant concern. Crockett wrote home expressing confidence that he would help draft the new republic's constitution. It was only after being swept up in the revolutionary fervor that he began to loudly proclaim his readiness for a fight. Stories of the Alamo siege blend historical fact, folklore, and pure invention. Most accounts correctly identify the joint command shared by William Travis and Jim Bowie, until Bowie was incapacitated by illness. Yet many dramatizations place Crockett in a quasi-leadership role, privy to all strategic decisions and trusted by both commanders. The reality is that Crockett held no formal rank. He was a private. Records even cast doubt on whether he formally led the Tennessee Mounted Volunteers he arrived with. According to 3 Roads to the Alamo, he informally guided a small group after attaching himself to a militia unit on the road to San Antonio. But a man named William B. Harrison was the official commander of their company. Despite his fame, Crockett was never the third in command. In contrast, the 2004 film The Alamo depicts him as hesitant and somewhat lost within the fort. However, eyewitness accounts in Travis's letters and other documents describe Crockett as a vital morale booster for the defenders, using his humor and resolve to lift spirits. So there you have them, the 7 most lethal lies that transformed Davy Crockett from a man into a fable. But here is the final compelling twist. Crockett himself was complicit. He understood the truth, yet allowed the myth-makers to spin their tales. He permitted politicians to revise his past. Why? Because in a young nation hungry for its own heroes, the unvarnished truth was never as valuable as a sellable legend. Now the judgment is yours to make. Was Davy Crockett a hero, a fraud, or something far more strange, a man ultimately imprisoned by the very myths he helped sell to survive? Share your verdict in the comments. And if you're willing, consider this. What other lies has America buried beneath coonskin caps and the martyrs of the Alamo? Subscribe to Winlink Deep Dive for more revelations that challenge everything you think you know.